So my name's Pete Tuckett. I'm a PhD student at the University of Sheffield, and just over my shoulder, you can see there, is Remy Vaness, and we have jointly organised this session with the support of the Grantham Centre for Sustainable Futures. So I should just quickly point out that this talk is the second in a series of 3 online webinars. So you can see on the slide that there's a couple more coming up in the next couple of weeks on a variety of themes on sustainability. So I would encourage everyone to look up at those and also sign up to those events. So myself and Remy are both keen cyclists, and we were really keen to put on a panel discussion where we could get different people's opinions on cycle commuting and the work that is going on at a variety of levels to increase uptake of cycling. So we've got 3 great speakers lined up, and I will now pass over to Matt Watson from the University of Sheffield, who is going to chair the session. So Matt, over to you.
Thanks very much, Pete, and also thanks to Remy, the 2 of you, for organising this fantastic event with a really great panel. So I'm Matt Watson. I work in the Department of Geography as a lecturer, and I research and write on a range of topics of sustainability and everyday life, including around urban mobility transitions, but that's one amongst many topics. But it was that work, along with more recent work on trying to reduce flight, not least the flight of academics, that got me invited to chair a university task and finish group on travel decarbonisation. So that task and finish group reported last summer with a heap of recommendations that went into the university's ambitious sustainability strategy goals. So that was around the travel that academics and other staff do as part of their work, including international travel, but also around commuting and the university's own fleet of vehicles. So as part of that group, our first speaker, Darren Hardwick, was instrumental in working particularly on commuting, but also more broadly across the range of topics. And that reflects his role at the university as Sustainable Travel Manager, and he's been working for a good number of years and being key to changes that have been affected by the university and its own planning and policy, and also with partners in the city, and helping to deliver real long-term substantial reduction in car commuting to the university and increases in active travel. We'll be going on next to hear from Matt Cox and Beth Grills, who are both employees and co-owners at the Birmingham Bike Foundry, which is a workers' cooperative in Birmingham. So as a workers' cooperative, all the employees are members of the co-op and have equal ownership of the foundry. So the foundry repairs bikes and offers cycle maintenance training to individuals, schools and organisations across the city, aiming to offer an affordable and environmentally friendly means of transport to as many people as possible. Then our third speaker is Pete Zanzottera. He is Active Travel Project Director for the Sheffield City region. There he works closely with Active Travel Commissioner for Sheffield, Dame Sarah Story. So Pete's work focuses on making the Sheffield City region more accessible to cyclists and pedestrians, reflecting his passion for widening participation in cycling and creating more sustainable ways of living within the city. So we'll be aiming for speakers to talk for 10 minutes or so should have 20 to 30 minutes for discussion. We'll keep questions until after all the speakers have spoken. But you can post questions anytime in the chat function to everyone. If the chat function ends up being too noisy with notifications, you can switch off the sound notifications using the settings, which you can access from the purple button at the bottom right of the screen. So I hope that all sounds okay, and without further ado, I'll hand over to our first speaker, Darren.
Thank you, Matt.
So yeah, I'm Darren Hardwick, and I'm the car parking and sustainable travel manager at the University of Sheffield. And I think in terms of number of years, I think I've been at it for nearly 13 now. So that gives you some indication. So I'm just going to run through a few of the things we've been up to in Sheffield and give you kind of a pictorial story of what's going on, really. So yeah, Sheffield, we introduced our integrated transport policy in 1997. And the key on that was to really restrict how many parking permits were issued, who gets them, and at what price. And I suppose critically, all income that we generate from car parking is ring-fenced and can only be used to manage that car parking and promote sustainable travel. And that's not really changed since 1997. The details have changed a little bit, but it's kind of been consistent throughout, really, and underpins how we can do what we can do. So in terms of barriers to cycling, I keep it kind of simple, really. Cycling is hard work. Often when people set out wanting to cycle, they'll have poor equipment or the wrong equipment. The topography in Sheffield is particularly challenging. It's a busy city, so there's a lot of traffic, and the climate is quite changeable. You can get 4 seasons in one day, as we've experienced today, really. In terms of our approach to promoting cycling, again, remembering that cycling is hard work, so look after your cyclists. Cycling is normal. It's not a niche activity. It's a perfectly normal thing to undertake. And cycling is good. It is something that we like people to do. And in terms of our approach, cycling is for the entirety of the year. It's not just for 1 week in September where we can roll out some nice banners. So we could try and keep that going throughout the year. So in terms of some things that we have done, I think a really key part is providing affordable bikes. We work with a local non-for-profit organisation called A Different Gear, and I think over the years we've probably provided about 1,200 recycled and refurbished bikes for students, and we subsidise the prices on those for students. Always massive demand, huge queues. So during pandemic, we have had to move it to an online system. The bikes always sell out quite quickly, always really popular. We do have a staff cycle to work scheme as well, which has been established for a number of years. And we also provide a student bike hire scheme. So if you want a bike for a bit of a shorter period of time, you can get one off us. We also help keep your bikes running. And I think it's one of those things, if your bike's in better condition, it does make cycling easier. So we offer free safety checks, minor tuning, free of charge. People can drop the bike off, have repairs done on things that wear out, like your chains, your brakes, cassettes, that sort of thing. During normal times, we're open twice a week, so it's dead easy just to pop in and keep your bike in good condition. And we do that through all weathers, and I'm really proud that my mechanics always make it in during the snow when everybody else is stuck in traffic. So if you cycle in and have a problem with your bike, our mechanics will be there for you. Nothing we do help keep your bike clean. We've actually installed a bike wash on campus, which hopefully gets used for much more sensible purposes than I'm using there. And then help flatten the hills. I think the e-bike has great potential in Sheffield in terms of opening up cycling commuting to a new bunch of people. So we will lend staff an e-bike for a few weeks, a couple of months, and they can sort of get used to living with one and find out if it's for them before having to go out and invest a couple of grand in a new e-bike. It's really popular. We've got quite a waiting list for those now. I think one of the biggest changes that we've made on campus is improvements to our public realm. We tended to have lots of great buildings, but the public realm they sat in wasn't quite so great. And the key of this is linking our very city-based campus with the city centre, lots of public highway, linking that through to the railway station. So I'm just going to sort of run you through a few before and after pictures so you can see what it was like maybe 5 years ago compared to what it looks like now. So this was very much at the centre of our campus, the main pedestrian cycle route, very much a car orientated environment dominated by traffic, not particularly friendly for walking or cycling. If you want to look about now, it's a predominantly traffic-free environment with limited access outside of core hours for deliveries and things like that. Two-way cycle lane running through the middle, lots of space for pedestrians, and just a much more pleasant place. This is coming off the main ring road, and this is what it looked like. This is a 40-mile-an-hour road moving into a 30-mile-an-hour road with a huge pedestrian environment. Again, very much dominated by the need to get buses through there. So very wide roads, encouraging high speed, lots of near misses with pedestrians. This is this now. So you can see two-way cycle lane running through the middle, lots of pedestrian space, and there's some seating and planters and trying to introduce a bit of greenery into campus. This is the A57 dual carriageway, which was running right through the middle of our campus, key route from Sheffield to Manchester. You can see it's completely inaccessible for pedestrians or cyclists trying to get across it. With significant work on this one to remove the central reservation, turn it into single carriageway, maintaining the same flow of traffic through there, but now with a super crossing, with access for pedestrians and the cycle lane running across it. And this was all done in collaboration with Sheffield City Council, led by the university, with funding from City Region. And then the last one, which was a kind of infamous bad cycle infrastructure, very sort of famously bad within Sheffield, cycle path to nowhere with a big lighting column in the middle and some rails across it. It really is completely useless, and we've replaced that. And you can see now that's where the cycle lane was, with a lighting column, and we've got a two-way cycle lane with lots of space for pedestrians and all the traffic removed from there as well. So it's a traffic-free environment. One of the big things we've done on campus is provide secure cycle parking. We've got lots of sites around campus. This is very much our kind of flagship facility, which is a purpose-built cycle hub, just shy of 200 cycle parking spaces. There's room for lockers and showers, and we're looking to replicate this in another couple of locations on campus. But also complemented by a lot of smaller secure facilities as you move around campus. Often we've given up a corner of a car park and put in a cycle cage or some cycle parking or something like that. And we've got showers, I think, in most of our major buildings now and facilities. And I suppose what we've tried to do is make cycling part of our business. This is what I mean about it being normal. So using cargo bikes for deliveries for a number of years. We've moved a lot of our security patrols from car to bike. It's a lot easier for the patrollers to get around campus, and they're more accessible. You're not going to go and talk to somebody if they're in a car in traffic, but the patrols on bikes, people will come and have a chat with them. And we've also, for a long time, we've given bikes to departments to allow people to travel between meetings and things like that. And I think with some of our tutors, we provided them with e-bikes, and they found that due to the time saved instead of walking, the e-bikes actually paid for themselves probably over a period of about 8 months. So we try and make a business case for cycling as well. And then everybody likes free coffee. We've given out free coffee for a long time, but we're a bit more advanced in terms of how we do it. We've worked with an organisation called Better Points. We have a reward app which people can download to their telephones. That app tracks your activity, be it walking, cycling, using public transport, and essentially you earn points as you do good behaviours. Those points can be cashed in for coffee or high street vouchers, or we can do things like donate it to local charities. And we also do other things like promote other sustainability events, litter picks, recycling, those sort of things. So we're trying to build it so it's more than just a travel and transport app. And we've had about 2,000 downloads of that, which we're really pleased with. We also run a raffle ticket type system, so we've given out a number of prizes, and this was a chap who won a folding bike at the end of one of our campaigns. And in terms of results, this is all pre-COVID, and I think post-COVID, as people return, is going to be a challenge. But in terms of 2019, we had a position whereby 24% of staff were travelling to work as single occupancy car driver, but more importantly, over a third of staff regularly actively travelling to work, either walking or cycling. And I work out that based on the student percentage and staff percentage, we've probably had around about 2,500 people regularly cycling to campus. And I guess the last one is just to remember, cycling is fun. It's a good fun activity. We run events to teach people to cycle and remember to cycle, come back to cycling. And it's great when you see somebody jump on a bike and ride off. They just come back with a massive smile on the face. And when I've got kids, they love riding a bike. It's a good fun thing to do. So we try and take the same approach in terms of how we can provide for our cyclists. And that's it from me.
Brilliant, thank you, Darren. That gets us off to a great start. It's fantastic, getting those reminders of how things were. The normality gets established too quickly, and you forget how much things have improved. So a great bunch of questions already. We'll come back to those at the end of this speakers session. So Darren obviously is presenting this kind of perspective of a major employer in a city, and employers clearly have a key role that they can play in affecting change. Move to a very sort of different organizational setting for affecting change, cooperative in Birmingham. So handing it over to Matt and Beth.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matt. So my name's Matt Cox. This is my colleague Beth Grills. We're both members of Birmingham Bike Foundry, which, as Matt says, is a non-profit worker co-op based in South Birmingham. We're a fully functioning bicycle repair shop. So I'm going to run you through a little bit about the history of the co-op and the shop. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what we think the barriers are to cycling, particularly in Birmingham. And then talk about what we do at the shop to try and counteract these challenges. So the co-op was founded in 2010 by Chris, Nancy, Finn and Lauren, who you can see pictured here. The four of them were not mechanics by any means. They were interested in cycling, but their main priority was to try and establish a sustainable form of employment. So they decided that a worker cooperative was the way to go, and they chose a bike shop because they knew that this would be, have positive societal impact. It would benefit the community, and it has a low, carbon impact, or in a lot of cases, positive impact on the environment rather than a negative one. The shop started out in a recording studio in the city centre, which was up a couple of flights of stairs. Noisy bands around, so as you can imagine, that was not very good to run a business out of. So it moved to Sturchley, which is a suburb of South Birmingham, in 2011. Sturchley's historically been known for having lots of cooperatives, and so it's nice to be able to carry on that tradition. Since we've moved to Sturchley, we've actually helped establish a couple of other worker co-ops on the high street, and now we're working with them on a bigger project to own our own space, which also involves some affordable housing units as well. So now we have 8 members from the original 4, and we're also hiring for a new member at the moment as well, which is great.
So we're kind of going to discuss the barriers to accessing cycling in Birmingham now. In sort of Birmingham's history, it's had a lot of car production, as well as its post-World War II redesign, which focused on creating arterial roads into the city centre, which only encourage car use in the city. This kind of means that there's been infrastructure in place for cars and not so much for cycling, as well as that it puts people off cycling when the roads are pretty narrow with parked cars parked all along them, with uneven surfaces, glass and other obstacles to be contended with. It's kind of meant that cycling in Birmingham can be very difficult, risky and dangerous. People find it kind of stressful sometimes as well, so we're kind of trying to get rid of those stereotypes and facilitate a more better environment for people to cycle in.
So I think a lot of cities in the UK, Birmingham's no exception, use existing greenways like canal towpaths and parkland to put cycle routes through. This is obvious reasons is that these paths already exist, so they're quite low cost to just make it into the cycle route. But the problem with this is that these spaces at night in particular are very dark, sort of isolated areas. Because of the wildlife that lives in these areas, you often can't light them up because that has negative impacts on the wildlife. So they remain dark, they remain isolated, and they're quite off-putting places to cycle. So if you're a cyclist in Birmingham, you often have to make a decision if you're riding at night between riding in one of these unlit, isolated areas or choosing a busy road with arterial traffic, HGVs, things like that. Sometimes as well, these routes, or more often than not, they're also passed through quite deprived neighbourhoods of the city. Cynically, I think this is possibly because the decision makers themselves don't live in those neighbourhoods, so it doesn't really have an impact on them. But also a lot of these neighbourhoods are closer to the city centre, so a lot of the routes coming out of the city are going to pass through them. And this can mean that you have people commuting on quite expensive bikes, possibly with laptops, mobile phones, things like that, moving through isolated areas, dark spaces where there's a high risk of being mugged. And this is something that happens quite a lot in the summer, in particular in Birmingham on one of the famous cycle routes here.
In sort of the inner city areas as well, there's not a great deal of space, and with a lot of small terrace houses and also flats, people find it very difficult to store their bikes. Often that means that they get stored outside in the rain, and you know, that kind of causes mechanical problems, and people think that it's quite a big challenge to sort of look after their bikes, and they feel like the expense of the maintenance and complex tools mean that repairs can be too technically challenging or costly for them to use. So to tackle this, that's something that is part of our main ethos as well.
Another thing is that I think it was touched on before, that bikes are really expensive if you want a really good quality bike. This is quite unattainable for lots of people, and also isn't really fit for purpose if they want to leave their bike locked up somewhere, or use it as a tool to get around and not just a sort of showpiece. But also, more importantly, I think the market is really heavily saturated with really, really terrible bikes. Bikes that make the experience for cyclists really unpleasant and not very enjoyable. And I think this puts off a lot of first-time cyclists because they spend, 50, 60 pounds on a new bike that they think, well, that's cheap and it looks good. But really, it gives them a pretty bad experience of cycling.
So to combat this, at Foundry, things we're trying to do a bit differently is we offer training courses to people, and we also work with school groups to get kids interested from an early age and give them the skills to be able to fix their own bike and kind of build their interest from that stage. We also take in donated bikes, and we refurbish them, and we just charge people for the cost of labour and parts, so we always sell them at a pretty reasonable price, but in a sort of really good quality. We run a tool club as well, so people can pay an annual membership fee, and then that means they can come into the shop and they can use the tools and then have a bit of guidance from one of the mechanics in the shop too. We really like to use cycling as a tool for social and radical change.
Because we're a worker co-op, our primary focus is still to provide sustainable employment for our members. And then after that, we are trying to promote cycling activity in the city as much as possible. So rather than trying to be, an elite shop that deals with high-end products, we're quite happy to be open to all sorts of customers with all sorts of bikes in all sorts of states. Sometimes this proves to be quite difficult work for us. A lot of these old bikes have very complex problems and some unusual parts on them that can be difficult, but it's pretty, it's pretty important for us to be open to everyone. And I think in Birmingham we have quite a strong reputation for being able to do that. Also, being a worker cooperative means that we can focus more on our collective values rather than individual financial gain. We have a flat management system here, so everybody gets paid the same regardless of your level of experience. And that means that we can focus on the community, what's best for the community, what's best for the environment, and what's best for creating this sustainable workplace, rather than worrying too much about profits or trying to please shareholders.
We're also committed to diversifying the makeup of the bike industry, and that's make a shop that's more accessible to a wider range of people. The bike industry itself is a barrier to cycling because of the cisgender white male culture that is perpetuated historically. So that's something that we're really trying to break through.
We also sell refurbished bikes, as Beth mentioned before, and our main focus with this is to sell them as affordably as possible. So it's a bit of an unusual business model in that people just give us unwanted bikes. We don't buy bikes to avoid the risk of buying stolen bikes, but also to buy a bike, you know, that's an added cost to the sale price of the bike. And we found that we've been running now for 11 years with people regularly donating bikes to us that they no longer need. We then fix up the bike and sell it for the cost of the parts and labour, as Beth mentioned. So this means that you can pick up a really, you know, good quality bike, sometimes even amazing quality bike with new parts added to it, fully serviced with a 3-month warranty, you know, for a much better price than you'd be able to find anywhere else.
So we found that as a result of these sort of actions we've taken, there are more people doing training and learning about bikes, especially kids in local schools. There's been a better understanding of the bike cycling sort of mechanically and within the community, which means greater enjoyment for people. We realised that we need a much broader diversity within the bike industry, and we hope that this in turn will encourage a broader diversity among cyclists, and training that we run is also kind of aimed to help that.
So we need to get people out on their bikes is the first and foremost thing to break down some of these barriers. I think in whatever format, and whichever setting that they want to do that, we should be encouraging that. We need better infrastructure in the cities, and we need this to put the most vulnerable road users as top priority, and make it less desirable for people to drive absolutely everywhere when it's unnecessary. We also need to stop driving our kids to school in cars, and we need to encourage them to walk or cycle and even ride their scooters more, to normalise these more sustainable, safer and cheaper modes of transport. Thanks for listening. We'll take some questions at the end, I think.
Fantastic, thanks Matt and Beth. It's brilliant hearing. It's the kind of innovation that community cooperatives are so good at, and it's brilliant to hear that model that you're developing. So moving now to another key site for affecting change in regional government. So a real pleasure to hand over to Pete Zanzottera.
Hi, thanks.
Sorry.
Hi, thanks, Matt. Nice to be here. Good to speak to you all virtually. My name is Pete Zanzottera. Most people call me Pete Z because it saves having to pronounce the horror of my surname. I am the Active Travel Programme Director for Sheffield City Region. I'm going to speak to you today in a personal capacity because some of the things I'll put up don't necessarily reflect the view, or the consolidated view of the mayoral combined authority. First up, I just want to put a little bit of context. I think this is probably one of the most used little graphs. South Yorkshire traditionally has very low cycling, and we also, across the country, we mismeasure cycling. So quite often we say only about 2% of people cycle, but that's cycling to work. And actually, if you look at the Active Lives survey, it's about 6% cycle regularly. And that's because most of the cyclists don't cycle on the main roads where the cordon counts are. This slide it still shocks me every time I see it. And it shows that a quarter of journeys under 500 meters are taken by the car. A half of journeys under 1.5 kilometers are taken by the car. You know, and I think it's just really sanguine to note that lots of people get very cross about putting in measures to help active travellers, but the real focus on this is the very short journeys. You know, the trips to the post box, that kind of thing, that lots of people still take in the car. I think the other thing when we talk about active travel is walking, because we think cycling measurements are poor, but walking measurements are almost non-existent in lots of places, unless they're city centres where we're measuring footfall for retail. Across South Yorkshire, vehicle use was rising and public transport use was falling. Public transport use has dropped off the bottom of the cliff and is back up to about 50–60%, but vehicle use is somewhere between 95 and 100% of what it was before the COVID epidemic. I think the other thing to put into this is activity levels are very, very low, and a huge proportion of people get almost no exercise whatsoever. It's a well-used statistic. The average cyclist in Europe is 4 kilograms lighter than the average car driver. And I think there's two other context things that are really important to note. The most deprived people have the least travel choice. We know that only a third of households in Sheffield City region don't have a car. That third of households is much higher in the deprived communities. And certainly something I'll return to that happened in the pandemic, those people with impairment are the most excluded. And I think some people think, oh, well, disabled people, they're only a small number. The work that we've done so far shows that somewhere around 20 to 25% of people have some kind of impairment that would affect their ability to travel. I think this is just a key slide for everybody to realise. Lots of people think electric cars are going to solve our problems. They're not. It's high vehicle ownership and high vehicle use is contributing to loads of problems: poor places, congestion, bad safety, poor health, lots of pollution. And the solution is very simple. It has to be high active travel and public transport use. And that is a universal truth that we need to effect. And it's going to take some change to do that. The Commissioner's pledges, first one, to be led by our communities. On the background of this slide is the interactive map. Only over 4,736, I think, comments on that map. Over 1,200 registered users that have given us their email addresses. So that's the first bit. The second bit is a key thing for the Commissioner and myself. I've lived through 3 different targets of the government to double cycling, none of which were achieved. And that's really because lots of people were putting out positive publicity saying it'd be a lot better if you rode your bike. We need to move away from just encouraging active travel. We need to enable it. We need to recognise that the reason people don't cycle is they don't feel safe. And the only way to make them feel safe is to build infrastructure that allows that. All of our infrastructure will meet and exceed minimum standards. Those standards have already been passed by the Mayoral Combined Authority. And the last bit, all of our infrastructure will be fully accessible. That's 3- and 4-wheel bicycles. That's people accompanied when on the footway. You know, and none of those barriers that you put across off-road routes. This is published in the Active Travel Implementation Plan, and this is the 2040 map. This will cost about £2.6 billion to realise. We're on our way. We've got a couple of £100 million already invested or being invested in it. I think the key thing for us to recognise was that this was a generational change. We have one generation where we can start to get this right. The kids that are being born right now need to grow up to be those kids, those adults that use the car less frequently and own less cars. That has to be our goal. What are those 2 components of that map I showed you? The first one is active travel lanes. A lot of people say bike lanes, but for us there are lots of legitimate users. If you look at the cycle superhighway near me where I live in Leeds, lots of people travel on there on their disabled buggies. There are people on electric scooters, skateboards, all kinds of things. And active travel lanes are for people averaging about 15 miles an hour. The footways are for people averaging about 4 miles an hour. And those active travel lanes need to be inclusive, accessible, but crucially, they need to be a connected network. We've spent years and years with little bits of disconnected cycle infrastructure, with disgruntled motorists looking out of the car window and saying, oh, well, I never see anybody on it. you know, if we built a car network like that, we'd have a couple hundred yards of motorway with no junctions and no roads leading to it, and people would look at it and say, well, why did you build that? I think that's the key part of this, that we need to make these active travel lanes accessible to lots of people and linked into a network. But it's not just active travel lanes. We need to look at our neighbourhoods. This is where those short journeys are being generated. This is a pub in Waltham Forest, but there's actually a similar pub in Healy where they've put a modal filter outside. In the summer, well, probably even now, people will be spilling out onto that area and drinking, even in the rain. That's how desperate they are. The other thing that I think quite often people think is you put these things in and they'll kill off business. And you look at the successful active neighbourhoods and they have done anything but that. They have spawned local businesses. They're a nice place to be. They're where people feel like they'd like to start up a business. School streets where we shut them off so that people dropping their kids off don't drop them off right outside the school and make it unsafe for everybody else. So the key part of our strategy is both those active neighbourhoods linked with the active travel lanes. And you may notice I've called them active neighbourhoods and not low traffic neighbourhoods, because I think a lot of people get a bit confused. Traffic is all people moving around. It includes people walking and cycling. And actually what we want is high traffic neighbourhoods, but with the right kind of traffic. Just to talk a little bit about the pandemic very quickly, I think the key thing about this slide, it's published quite frequently, but without the top line on, and that is the cycle use. And it just shows something that we've always known, that when vehicular traffic goes down, cycling goes up. And when vehicular traffic goes up, cycling goes down. You know, and it took a pandemic to point this out to lots of people. I think the other thing is to recognise what the pandemic did, because it allowed walking and running and cycling to become a lot more widespread. And what we find is that the cycling has dropped back down, but is somewhere, you know, 20–30% where it was before the pandemic. So we have converted a few people, but running has almost doubled in our communities. And walking was already high and went up a little bit and is probably still about the same level. And that's mirrored at the same time by a collapse in public transport, which we are only just beginning to build back in. I think this is a really interesting thing for us to look at. The change that people think that the pandemic has made to them is 40% are going to walk more. 30% are going to work from home more often, and nearly 30% are going to cycle more. What are they not going to be doing so much of? Flying and commuting. And I suppose just one last thing. I know Darren will really understand this, because Darren's a behaviour change specialist, but travel behaviour is in a very plastic state at the moment. We know that the London bombings, the London Olympics were prompts for people to make really big changes in the way they move about. And right now, we're in a stage where people are saying, will I be doing a 2-3-2 week, a 1-4-2 week? How often will I go to work? And there's just one slide in here that's some research from ITS in Leeds, looking at car ownership between the two waves of the pandemic. And far more people reduced their ownership of cars than increased it. But there was a lot of transfer. And I think that's the key thing to note, that lots of people are changing behaviour. And it's really important now that we go out, discuss with people and give them a chance to think about what they're going to do, talk about what they do and argue about it. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Pete. So that's 3 really stimulating talks from people in these kind of different locations, different settings from which to be able to affect change. So I think they've given us kind of a really rounded view already. We've had some fantastic posts in the chat. I hope you'll be keeping track of the resources and the points people have been making, including a good number of questions already, but do keep the questions coming now for any of the speakers. Do think back to Darren and Matt and Beth, not just Pete, even though he was the last speaker, but questions for Pete as well. So do get them in the chat in the meantime. Let's make a start. I mean, I think a general question, the event was entitled kind of enabling access for all, and we've heard different aspects of that around the Bike Foundry's efforts to kind of open out participation and break the domination by white males of cycling. And just the inspiring stuff to hear from Pete in terms of a regional approach to planning infrastructure that is accessible and inclusive and connected up. But I wonder if any of the speakers, all the speakers, like to have some brief kind of reflections on that kind of challenge of just opening up the range of participation in cycling.
I'll go first, Matt. So if that's helpful, I think in terms of participation, I think the university is a really good example in terms of just the kind of the cross section of communities who take part in cycling. It's not a niche to one particular demographic or anything like that. The university has really managed to get people of all ages and men, women, whatever, everybody cycling. I mean, you engage with people at the beginning of their cycling career, and you engage with people at quite late in their cycling career. And only last week we handed out a cargo bike to somebody who's been cycling for years and is a dedicated cycling commuter. So I think it's there. I think it's in terms of engaging. Yeah, Paul, me, that's you. Yes, he said yes. So it's there, and it's I suppose the challenge now is, particularly for us at the university, we've always had a good level of people who walk and a good level of people who cycle. We are that type of organisation. I think the challenge is for people who've been catching the bus. You speak to people, a lot of reluctance about public transport, and I think a lot of public transport users were potentially reluctant public transport users. I wouldn't let them park on campus, so I made them catch the bus instead, or something like that. So that kind of conversation we're going to be having moving forwards, and that potential to try and get people who were public transport users perhaps using active travel a bit more, and maybe not for the entire part of your journey, maybe for part of your journey. So in terms of could they perhaps avoid some of the city centre where the public transport is busiest and those sort of things. But I think that's going to be a big challenge for us moving forward.
Brilliant, thanks Darren. Pete, Matt, Beth, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it is a key question, and the leader of Barnsley Council asked it just the other day in the local enterprise partnership. Can you assure me, or how am I going to have this conversation on deprived people's doorsteps? I think one of the things that I'd know is I live in West Leeds. It's not an affluent area. We built a super highway between here and Bradford, and you may say in the morning and evening peaks, you see quite a lot of lycra people on expensive bikes, but that is by no means the majority. And throughout the day, there is a massive mix of people. And the cycle superhighway goes to Bradford, and there are lots and lots of BAME community people riding bikes there. So I think it's largely because our best example is the centre of London. And we do know that in the centre of London, cycling increases linearly with income, but don't make that presumption of anywhere else. And I think Darren's a really good case study, because you look at a university is a great leveler for people coming in, I think, because they all come in, they all face the same transport problems, and they're all smart enough to be able to work out the solutions.
I think the point we'd make is about mechanics training, really, and having an understanding of the bicycle itself. I think this is such a huge barrier, no matter what level of cycling you're at, or what your starting position is in terms of finance stuff. because the minute that bike breaks and you don't know how to fix it, it's so much easier just to lean it up against the alleyway again and say, you know, I'll fix that at a later date. But even just knowing what parts are called, so that you have the confidence to go to a shop and say, you know, there's a problem with my rear derailleur, or, you know, I think the tube needs replacing on this tyre. That, I think that will encourage more people to you know, continue to ride their bikes even when things go wrong with them.
Thanks very much, Matt. So that links nicely to, it's great to see Natalie Bennett in the comments there. Natalie earlier asked about that kind of role of maintenance in enabling cycling. It's clearly what Bike Foundry is all about, but I guess amongst the initiatives that the university takes, Darren, there's obviously a cycle hut providing a maintenance service. But has there been any consideration of sort of maintenance training?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's one of those things where we've had pockets of it whereby departments take advantage of those sort of things, and it's always something we're keen to look at and keen to do. I mean, we do learn to ride sessions and things like that on campus, and I think part of that process. But yeah, certainly, I think. As I say, we have small pockets of examples, particularly in the faculty of engineering, where they do that sort of self-help type thing. I think probably the only thing that's we've struggled with a little bit is having a good space and a good setup, really. You know, in terms of if you're going to do like a maintenance class, having half a dozen or so racks set up whereby you've got the tools that you need and those sort of things. So we have in the past worked with a different gear down in Healy to try and get people up on their maintenance classes. But I think ideally trying to do it on campus somewhere would be the ideal. But it's certainly something I'm willing to look at and try and consider in future. I think having the mechanics on site, as I say, I put in the comments, it's having mechanics. How often do you go into a bike shop? And I've done it myself, and I've walked out so annoyed. I'm trying to think of the correct polite terminology, so engrossed with themselves they kind of forget the customer, you know what I mean? Whereas actually, if you've got a couple of mechanics who are in the facility where you are, the doors are open, they're normal people are just cycling themselves, you know, and it's kind of like it's much easier to go and chat to that person than walking into a cycle shop where you're just confronted with a load of new bikes and people trying to sell you stuff, you know. So for our mechanics, it's all about fixing stuff and maintaining and having that conversation with people, and then speaking about where you can cycle, where you can get advice and those sort of things. So. Match is still muted.
Am I muted now? No. I was just going to say again, from the Bike Foundry perspective, that's something that we've always tried to focus on doing is breaking down those barriers to arriving to a bike shop as well. It is really difficult, and I experienced it before I worked in a bike shop, trying to communicate what's wrong with your bike and to not feel sort of intimidated by the people in the shop. Often mechanics are quite famous for being moody, busy, and like a bit stressed out by their work. So at the Bike Foundry, we really try hard to be as welcoming as possible to people from all backgrounds, and talk to people about their bike in a way that is most importantly easy for them to understand, but also not patronizing at all, because you can put people off going to the bike shop. One is by just bamboozling them with information, and the other one is by making them feel stupid and like they shouldn't be in that environment.
Brilliant, thanks, Matt. So I've got some more kind of specific questions for, I guess, Sheffield City region, so around any plans to introduce car sharing or to promote car sharing.
Yeah, thanks. I can't right now. There aren't. And I think there are two questions, actually. There's one about road user charging, and right now there isn't. That's because Sheffield City Region is 4 different local authority leaders and the mayor, and as yet there isn't a key agreement on that. One of the local authorities could go alone. So those are absolutely fantastic policies, but actually, if you look at the places that are really doing it across the UK, it's a handful of places. So only really Nottingham and London have road user charging of any kind, and they are very, very different beasts. Yes, it would be great from my perspective, but I don't think we're there yet. I do want to also note, though, if you look on Connecting Sheffield, there is going to be the biggest change to the centre of Sheffield for a long time, probably bigger than when they introduced the tram. You know, that Sheffield Centre is not going to be somewhere where you expect to bring your car every day to park and go to work. And parking and shopping will probably be far less of the mix, you know, and public transport and active travel around the city centre is planned to be far bigger. So I would say that Sheffield should really take a lot of praise for bringing in those. And if you look around them, they are active travel lanes and low traffic and active neighbourhoods that really exemplify what we would like to do. So those are fantastic things. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Pete. I guess more for Darren, but might be interesting if other people have ideas as well. It's a question from Ian, sort of from the university's experience of affecting change. Do you have any tips for Sheffield teaching hospitals on how they could follow suit?
Yeah, no, I've seen that, and I suppose one of the good things you can do is talk to the people who you know, and I think I'm always really keen to kind of collaborate with organisations in the area and do so with people who do a similar job within the teaching hospitals environment. I think the one thing which we have been really good at is managing our car parking, and it's such an important part. And I know Pete was talking about road user charging and what have you. Well, we have a kind of a needs-based car parking assessment. So we actually say to people, you're not allowed to drive and park on campus. Do you know what I mean? We're not going to provide you with a parking permit. We've only got so many spaces, and we have that kind of demand management tool. And I think for any large organisation, particularly ones like hospitals and universities, having that ability and having the nerve to do that and take all the problems that come with it in terms of complaints from staff groups and things like that. But I think because we got that there, we had a really nice equilibrium in terms of how many people are driving to work, really managing that and using some of the income that's generated from staff. I always said to the people, the people who were driving to work, you're not really paying for parking, you're paying to try and stop other people from driving to work as well, and that income that you're paying into our pot is actually going towards people walking and cycling. So that's what you're paying for. It's not you paying for parking, it's paying for that ability for 6,500 people to get to work in the morning, and kind of that sort of thing. So I think just taking that approach, realise that it takes a long time. Go back to the university, 1997, I think there's something like 60% of staff who are using the car to get to work. Now that's dropped drastically. Big switches to walking, and some good stuff in terms of, it's really interesting with cycling. The rate of staff cycling has kind of stayed the same for a number of years, but actually the workforce has grown quite a lot from when I started. I think it's a lot bigger, so actually the number of people cycling increases, even if the rate amongst staff hasn't changed particularly.
Thanks, Darren. So there's been quite a lot of comments in the chat around the experience, I guess, of fear on the roads, and the sense that a significant number of people who drive cars, whilst driving cars, can have quite a lot of animosity in relation, or at least a lack of attention to cyclists. It's a tough question to get to in the last few minutes, but there's a really pointed question from Liz Sharp on how do we promote, support a conversation with car drivers. I mean, most cyclists are car drivers as well, but that set of car drivers who seem to be perhaps less well disposed towards a growing number of cyclists on the roads.
I'm ready to answer that if you want that. I think it is down my alley. The first thing to say is we have spent years and years putting all of the onus on what's been called victim blaming, but those vulnerable road users or those people who are out cycling, the emphasis is on them to protect themselves in shields of armour and buy high-class video cameras to do all of that. And the action has to be on the drivers. The source of the danger is people driving badly. Also, it's actually quite a small proportion of people. So we really need to get our enforcement colleagues to help us. We do have Operation Close Pass. I think there's one on the 20th this week in Sheffield. We've started it in Sheffield. And it's being rolled out across the region. And that's one of the first things to actually put the emphasis back on drivers. Those drivers that drive too close and are found doing it are taken to one side, talked to, fined if necessary. Quite often they are found to be driving a vehicle that's not legal. That's the kind of thing. So we really do need to put the emphasis back on the source of the danger. And I will make no secret that this is absolutely a passionate focus for the Commissioner in the next year, because we really cannot continue with this idea, because it's been going for years. We say get helmets, all of those kind of things, and what happens? The level of cycling stays the same, and the amount you need to spend to go on a bike goes up and up and up, and the amount of fear does not go down. The reason people are scared is because it feels dangerous. Are they right? Yes, they are, because the people that don't cycle rate danger the same as the people that do cycle. So it's a loud and clear message for us. We understand it. We now need to push that over into action.
Brilliant. Thank you, Pete. So yeah, it's an excellent response in a short amount of time to what is a massive issue, and we could pursue it, I'm sure, much further, but unfortunately we're out of time. It's fantastic seeing all the contributions in the chat. The chat has been recorded along with the talks and the discussion, so they're all there. And there are some more specific questions, maybe for Sheffield University, that maybe you'll get some responses to. But I guess just remains for me to say thanks again to Pete and Remy for organising this event, and thanks so much to our fantastic panel of speakers. It's great that you could join us and share your experience and perspectives. Pete, Remy, did you want to say any final words?
No, I think you've covered it there, but yeah, just to echo your words and thank all the speakers. Yeah, really amazing talks, and yeah, hopefully lots can come out of this.
Yeah, brilliant. So thanks everyone, and thanks for all the fantastic contributions in the chat.